I'm Caroline Weston, 34 years old, and the last memory I have of my brother as family is him stepping over me while I lay on the kitchen floor, blood in my mouth, ribs aching, not even a glance in my direction, just a huff, like I was a spilled drink or a mess. Someone else should clean up. A few minutes later, my phone lit up with a text from him. 4 words that ended everything. Stay away from us before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever had to walk away from someone who should have protected you, tap that, like and subscribe, so more stories like this. Find the people who need them. I grew up in northern Indiana, small town, quiet streets, the kind of place where people wave from their porches and neighbors still borrow sugar. My parents believed in working hard, being polite, and above all, keeping the peace. We weren't rich, but we had what we needed. My mom clipped coupons and my dad fixed everything himself. We were the kind of family that showed up for school plays and church picnics and believed you didn't air your dirty laundry in public. I was the oldest child, the steady one. I always did what was expected of me, got good grades, never got in trouble, held down my first job at the hardware store. When I was 16, I stayed close to home for college, took a business degree, and landed a steady job with a mid-sized logistics firm right after graduation. I worked my way up, kept my credit clean, bought my first car in cash. It was a modest life, but it was mine, and I built it with care. My younger brother Ben was different. Even as a kid, he had this way of drawing all the attention without trying. He could charm his way out of anything, and when he messed up, it was brushed aside. Boys will be boys, they said. When he forgot chores or skipped school, he always had a story, always a reason, and somehow the rules never stuck to him. I didn't resent him. Not really. I just learned that in our family, love came wrapped in different packaging for me. It was quiet pride, a pat on the shoulder for him. It was applause, dinners out, balloons on his birthday, even when he turned 28 and still hadn't held down a job longer than 6 months. It was around that time he brought home Megan. She was soft-spoken at first, a little nervous around crowds, pretty in that delicate way that made people want to protect her. She said she hadn't had an easy life, told stories about moving around a lot, never feeling safe, never belonging. I felt for her, really did. When they needed help finding a place to live, I offered to co-sign the lease without blinking when Megan lost her job and couldn't cover the deposit. I wrote the check, told her to pay me back when she could. She called me the sister she never had. We sat at my kitchen table fixing her resume together, sipping tea like we were family. And for a while, I believed we were. I had no idea that kindness would end with me on the floor of that same kitchen, barely breathing, watching my own brother walk away, like I meant nothing. The next morning, I woke to the cold ache in my ribs and the sting on my lip. My alarm clock blinked red in the dim bedroom light, but I didn't need it. I hadn't slept more than a few hours, and even that felt like a blur. When I swung my legs out of bed, I moved slowly, wincing at the soreness that spread through my side. I made my way to the bathroom, catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The skin around my mouth was swollen, deep purple, blooming where Sarah's knuckles had landed. I pressed gently near my ribs and felt the tightness beneath the surface. There'd be bruises soon, plenty of them. I turned on the faucet and held a cool washcloth to my face, trying to calm the heat in my skin. There was no mistaking it. What happened wasn't a spat or some family disagreement. She hit me, and Ben stood there like it didn't matter. The first person I called was Jessica. I didn't plan what to say. As soon as I heard her voice, everything spilled out: the fight, the kitchen, the blood. Ben's silence. Her reaction was instant. No hesitation, no doubt in her tone. "You're calling the police," she said, and her voice didn't waver. "Don't you dare let this slide. I'm coming over now." She didn't ask questions. She didn't say, "Are you sure?" or try to soften it. She knew. She'd known for years that something in my family was off. Not just Ben, all of it. While I waited, I sat at the dining table, the same one where I'd helped Megan draft her resume months earlier. The sun pushed through the blinds, slanting across the tabletop, and I watched the dust float in the light like everything around me was suspended. I reached for my laptop and opened the banking portal. I wasn't sure I was ready to do anything with it yet, but I needed to see it. The loan paperwork was all there, neatly filed in my online dashboard. $750,000. The house Ben and Megan had fallen in love with, a big 2-story place on the edge of town, with white columns and a porch swing. I remembered the photos they'd shown me, the way Megan had leaned her head on Ben's shoulder while he talked about summer barbecues and a nursery upstairs. Back then, I'd believed it. I wanted to believe it. I thought maybe the house meant something more like stability or a fresh start. I didn't know then how quickly that foundation would crack. They'd needed my name to get that house. Their credit wasn't strong enough on its own. Megan had a spotty job history. Ben had debts that never seemed to go down, only sideways. But I had a solid salary, a clean record, and a high credit score. I was the reason the loan had been approved in the first place. My name was the backbone of their application. I stared at the screen for a long time, mouse hovering over the button that would start the process of removing my guarantee. There were warnings, pop-ups. Are you sure this action may result in denial? Legal and financial consequences may apply. I read every word. Then I clicked yes. The process took several steps. A code sent to my phone. Security questions I hadn't thought about in years. First pet's name, mother's maiden name. I typed them all in. The final screen showed the legal release form. I read it twice. Then I signed. Afterward, I didn't move. I sat back in the chair, the silence thick as cotton around me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything at all. Not yet. I just knew I had done what needed to be done. By the time Jessica arrived, I was dressed and had already packed a small bag for the urgent care clinic. We sat in the waiting room together, her hand on my knee, saying nothing. The nurse called my name and I followed her into the exam room. The doctor was efficient and gentle. He noted the split in my lip, the swelling, the bruising just beginning to surface around my ribs. Blunt force trauma, he said, almost clinical. But his voice was kind. When I got home, I took photographs in the hallway mirror. I made sure the lighting was good, the angles clear. I saved them to a folder on my desktop. Then I titled it, Evidence for Court. The next afternoon, my phone rang. Ben's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a second before I picked up. Danielle, what did you do? His voice was higher than usual, sharp and frantic. The bank called. They said the guarantor pulled out. They're denying the loan. What did you do? I waited. Then I said, you told me to stay away. So I am. And I hung up. That evening, there was pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. I looked through the peephole and saw them both. Megan's face was twisted with fury. Ben looked panicked, the kind of panic that comes when something you've taken for granted slips through your fingers. Open this door! Danielle! Megan yelled, her voice shrill and cracking. You're ruining our lives! Our wedding, our home! Please, Ben said, his tone shifting. Let's talk. Don't do this. Think about Mom and Dad. Think about everything we've been through. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. I watched through the glass, then turned and walked away. I blocked their numbers. I turned off the doorbell. Then I sat down at my desk and reopened that folder. Evidence for court. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I wouldn't be backing down. The real blow didn't come from Ben. It didn't even come from Megan. It came the next morning when my phone rang again. My mother. She didn't ask if I was okay, didn't ask how I was feeling. Ben told me what happened, she said. How could you be so selfish after everything we've done for you? You're going to destroy your brother's happiness over a little disagreement. A little disagreement, I repeated. I could barely believe what I was hearing. He watched while she hit me. He stepped over me like I wasn't even there. Oh, stop, she said. You've always had a sharp tongue. You probably pushed her too far. And with all the stress she's under, her voice went on soft and scolding. the same voice she used when I'd cried over unfair things as a kid, the same voice that had always asked me to be the bigger person. I hung up without another word. Then I sat down on the floor of the hallway and cried until my chest ached. Jessica came by later, let herself in with the key I'd given her years ago. She sat beside me, didn't say much, just held my hand. The next call came from my Aunt Diane. "Your mother told me everything she said. Danielle, I'm so disappointed. Your brother's heartbroken. He might lose the house. Don't throw away your family over this." That was when it finally hit me. It wasn't just about Ben or Megan. This was the whole system built around keeping things quiet, asking me to carry the weight, telling me not to make trouble. And I was done carrying it. What I didn't expect was what showed up in the mail 3 days later, a thick envelope stamped with official markings. Inside was a restraining order, filed against me. The envelope had that stiff, official feel to it, the kind of paper that doesn't bend easily. My name was typed clean across the front. I held it in both hands as I sat on the edge of the couch, the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the only sound in the apartment. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I opened it. The pages were crisp. I skimmed the first few lines, then went back and read them again slower. It was a temporary restraining order, filed by Megan. Her claims were detailed, written like a story where I was the villain. She said I'd harassed her for months, showed up uninvited, made threats. She wrote that I'd become unstable, jealous of her relationship with Ben, and that I'd grown aggressive. The last part said I'd physically attacked her in a fit of rage. I folded the letter in half, then again, and set it down on the coffee table. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I sat very still and stared at the rug beneath my feet. There was a part of me that wanted to call someone. My mom, maybe. But I already knew what I'd hear. "You always did take things too far, Caroline," or "Can't you just let it go?" I stood up and walked to the hallway. The light was softer there, and the air felt still. I leaned my shoulder against the wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. That's where Jessica found me 30 minutes later, her knock gentle like she already knew. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just looked at me, then picked up the envelope from the table. She read it once carefully, then looked back at me. "They're trying to flip the story," she said. "They want you to back down." I nodded. I didn't say anything yet. Jessica sat beside me on the floor. She didn't offer comfort or platitudes, just sat there shoulder to shoulder quiet. That silence held more than anything words could have done in that moment. The next morning I called the lawyer Jessica had mentioned the week before. Her name was Nora Davies. I remembered her voice on the phone, calm, measured. She asked questions without emotion. "Do you have medical documentation?" "Yes." "Do you have photographs?" "Yes." "Do you have anyone who can testify to your character and what happened after?" "Yes." I gave her the name of the urgent care clinic, forwarded the photos, and sent her the digital file of the voicemail Megan left the night the mortgage was denied. A few days later, I sat in a small courtroom across from Ben and Megan. My mother sat behind them, arms folded tight across her chest. She didn't look at me when I walked in. Megan wore a soft blue blouse, something that made her look smaller, more delicate. Her hair was pulled back. Ben looked pale and tired. When the hearing began, their lawyer stood first. He spoke clearly and with conviction. He described me as overbearing, controlling someone who had always tried to interfere. He referenced my job, said it made me high-strung. He painted a picture of a woman so attached to her brother that she couldn't bear to let go. He said Megan was scared for her safety. Ben was next. He shifted in his seat, voice low, hands folded. He talked about how I'd always been protective, sometimes too much. He said I hadn't handled the engagement well, that I'd been cold toward Megan in recent months. He said things had escalated, that he didn't want trouble, he just wanted peace. He said I'd shown up angry, started yelling, and that what happened in the kitchen wasn't clear, but that Megan had felt threatened. I sat still. I didn't look away. When it was our turn, Nora stood slowly. She didn't rush. "Your Honor," she said, "we're not here to argue about feelings. We're here to present facts." She began with the photographs. She handed them to the clerk who passed them to the judge. The room went quiet as the images were reviewed. My face bruised and swollen, the cut on my lip, the pattern of the bruise spreading along my rib cage. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Then came the medical report. It listed the visible injuries, the doctor's assessment, the note on blunt force trauma. Nora read a portion aloud. Her voice didn't change. The final piece was the video footage. The hallway outside my apartment had a security camera installed by the building owner months ago. The footage was short, silent, time-stamped. It showed Megan shouting her mouth wide, then lunging toward me. You could see me step back. You could see her hand shove my shoulder. You couldn't see what happened once we were inside. But then after a few seconds, Ben appeared in the frame. He didn't rush. He didn't look panicked. He just stood there, then walked away. The judge didn't speak for a moment after it ended. She tapped the edge of her desk lightly with her pen. Then she said, "Petition for restraining order is denied." Her voice was firm, almost clipped, and I would strongly advise the petitioner to consider the legal consequences of filing false statements. The gavel hit the bench. The sound echoed sharp through the room. I stood. Jessica touched my arm lightly as we gathered our things. My mother looked at me for the first time that morning. She opened her mouth like she wanted to speak, but no words came. I walked past her without slowing down. Ben followed us into the hallway. "Caroline," he said. His voice was thin, strained. I didn't know it would go this far. I looked at him. I waited. Then I said, "You were there. You knew what happened. You watched her hit me." He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. That night I went home and lit a candle in the kitchen. I turned off the overhead lights and let the soft glow fill the space. I opened the windows and let the evening air roll through the apartment. Then I sat at the table and began writing everything down, every call, every message, every moment I could remember from the past few weeks. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it all yet, but I wanted the record to exist because I knew this wasn't the end of it. The morning after the hearing, I stood by the window in my kitchen, watching a slow drizzle fall over the street. The apartment was quiet. I hadn't turned on the news or music. I just stood there with a cup of tea cooling in my hands, thinking about how everything had shifted, not just legally, but inside me. I wasn't waiting for another phone call. I wasn't checking for texts. The silence no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like space. Space I hadn't had in years. I sat down with my notebook and opened to a fresh page. I wrote the date at the top, then underlined it. I made a list, just a plain one, no titles or categories, just things I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud. I wrote down what Ben did, what Megan did, what Mom said. Then I added something new, a line I hadn't written before, what I'm going to do next. I went back through all the paperwork from the bank. The loan cancellation was already official, but I wanted every document on file. I requested confirmation in writing, printed a copy of the loan terms, and saved them in a folder with the court materials. I wanted a full picture, every decision, every consequence. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the storage unit I kept in the basement. It was mostly old files, extra dishes, a few things from the last apartment I'd never unpacked. I opened one of the boxes marked Dad's desk. Inside was a fireproof folder where I'd tucked the original lease papers for Ben and Megan's apartment. My name was there, plain as day, co-signer. I scanned a copy and added it to the folder on my desk. Then I made another list. Not about the past this time, about what I still had control over. My name, my credit, my time, my home. It looked small at first, but it felt different this time. It felt solid. That weekend I cleaned, top to bottom. I pulled everything out of the pantry and rearranged the shelves. I donated clothes I hadn't worn in years. I boxed up the dishes Megan had picked out when they'd stayed with me that summer. I dropped them off at Goodwill the next morning and didn't look back. I called the building manager about the security footage. I asked for a written statement confirming the timestamp and chain of custody. He said it wasn't standard practice to issue that kind of letter, but when I explained what had happened, he agreed to write one. I picked it up that Thursday. On Sunday, I called Nora and asked for a meeting. We sat in her office with the blinds half closed. I handed her the folder. She opened it slowly, reading through each item one by one. When she got to the security footage documentation, she looked up at me. "You've done more than most clients ever do," she said. "You're organized. You're clear. Are you ready to press charges?" I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window behind her desk. The trees had started to turn. It was that early part of fall when the tips of the leaves go gold before the rest of the branch catches up. I turned back to her. "I want to file a formal police report," I said, "and I want a civil claim started. If they're going to lie about what happened, I'm not staying quiet." Nora nodded. "All right," she said. And that was that. By midweek, the report was filed. I gave a statement to the responding officer who took down every detail. He asked questions without judgment, just facts. He noted the prior medical report, the video footage, the photos. When we were done, he shook my hand and said they'd be in touch. I thanked him and stepped back into the afternoon sunlight. I walked 3 blocks before I stopped at a coffee shop and ordered a plain hot tea. I sat near the window, watching people pass by on the sidewalk. It was the first time in a long while that I sat in public without checking my phone, without thinking about what might be waiting for me at home. I didn't tell many people what was happening, not yet. A few close friends knew. Jessica, of course. My co-worker Mallory had noticed something was different. I told her a little, just enough to explain why I seemed quiet in meetings lately. She listened without pushing. She brought me lunch the next day. One evening I walked past the community center near my building. A flyer on the bulletin board caught my eye: weekly pottery classes Tuesday nights 6:30. I took a picture of the number and signed up the next morning. I hadn't touched clay since high school art class, but it felt like something I wanted to try. That Tuesday, I sat at a wheel with a fresh lump of clay and a shallow tray of water. The instructor showed us how to center the clay, how to press our thumbs just right so the walls of the bowl wouldn't collapse. My first attempt was lopsided. The second one split down one side, but I kept trying. The wheel turned beneath my hands, steady and soft. I leaned over the clay, shaping it gently, letting it rise under my fingers. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. By the time class ended, my hands were covered in gray slip, and my apron was a mess. I looked down at the uneven bowl I'd made and smiled. I signed my initials into the base and set it on the drying rack. Outside, the sky had darkened. The streetlights were just starting to hum. I zipped up my jacket and walked home slowly, letting the cool air settle in around me. The case wasn't over. There was still more ahead. But something inside me had shifted. I was standing in line at the pharmacy when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't check it right away. I paid for the bottle of ibuprofen, nodded politely at the cashier, and stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The sun had come out after 2 days of gray, and everything looked sharper: the leaves, the street signs, even the faint clouds overhead. I pulled out my phone and saw the name right there on the screen, Ben. I let the screen go dark. I didn't need to hear whatever excuse or offer he was about to make. I slipped the phone back in my pocket and kept walking. Back at home, I checked my email and saw a notification from the bank. The final cancellation notice had gone through. The mortgage had officially been withdrawn. Their financing was no longer valid. Without my name, the loan had crumbled. I sat there for a few minutes, reading it twice. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, just clarity. I opened the folder on my desktop and moved the notice into the file labeled House Terminated. The next evening, just as I was setting a casserole in the oven, I heard a loud knock at the door. Then another louder, sharper. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the entryway. I didn't open it. I looked through the peephole. It was them. Ben stood slightly behind Megan. She looked furious. Her hands were balled into fists, jaw tight. Ben looked less angry than lost eyes darting mouth drawn tight. Caroline Megan shouted, "Open the door, I didn't move. You're ruining everything," she yelled. "The house, the wedding, you're being ridiculous." Ben stepped forward. "Please," he said. "Can we just talk? We can work something out." I kept my hand on the door frame. My heart was beating steady, but not fast. I stood there for another moment, then turned and walked back toward the kitchen. They kept knocking for a while. Then the noise stopped. I blocked their numbers that night. Not just Ben's and Megan's, but my mother's too. I deleted the voicemails, filed the rest of the messages, and turned off all notifications. I didn't want to read another word from them, not until I chose to. The next day, I got a text from Jessica. "You free for lunch?" I met her at a small cafe near her office. She listened as I told her what happened the night before. She didn't say much, just nodded. At the end of the meal, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small thumb drive. "This has backups of all the photos and documents. Keep it in a separate place, just in case." When I got home, I added it to the fireproof box in my closet and locked it. Later that week, I received a formal letter from the developer handling the sale of the house Ben and Megan had wanted to buy. It was addressed to all parties on the application. The purchase had fallen through. The property would be relisted. I read it once, then tucked it into the same file as the loan termination. That Saturday, I dropped by the pottery studio early to glaze the bowl I'd made. It had dried nicely, still uneven at the top, but sturdy. I chose a soft gray glaze and brushed it on, slowly working in quiet strokes. I left it on the rack to be fired with the next batch and stepped outside into the chill. Back at home, I lit a candle in the living room and opened my laptop. I started a new document, one that wasn't for court or evidence. Just a plain letter. I wrote down everything that had happened. Not for them, just for myself. I listed the moments in sequence: the kitchen, the loan, the visit to urgent care, the restraining order, the hearing, the knock at the door. When I finished, I saved it in a folder called Record. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the truth. That night, I got a knock on my neighbor's door. Mrs. Kessler, who lived 2 floors up, had locked herself out. I helped her call the building manager and waited with her in the hallway. She told me about her granddaughter's school recital and the peach cobbler she was trying to bake. It felt good to talk about something small, something that had nothing to do with courts or conflict. When I got back to my apartment, I looked around the living room. It was tidy blankets, folded dishes, clean mail sorted. I took a deep breath and let the quiet settle over me. There was more to do. The legal process was still underway. But I'd taken the first step, my own step, the kind that couldn't be undone with a phone call or smoothed over with an apology. The court hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. I got there early, about 40 minutes before the docket began. The hallways smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee. Jessica sat beside me on the wooden bench, her hands folded in her lap. We didn't talk much. Every now and then she'd glance over to make sure I was okay. I just kept breathing slowly, one count at a time. Across the aisle, Megan arrived first. She wore a soft gray dress and low heels, her hair pulled neatly into a bun. Her expression was blank, almost delicate, as she clutched a tissue in one hand. Ben walked in a few minutes later, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. He didn't glance in my direction. Then came my mother. She carried a large handbag and sat with Megan like they'd always been close. Nora leaned over and whispered, "We go second. Let them present first. Don't react." The judge was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back into a twist. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the paperwork before calling the case. Megan's attorney stood first, introduced himself, and walked to the podium. He started with what he called a history of behavior. He described me as overprotective, intense, prone to emotional outbursts. He said my success had created tension in the family, that I'd grown jealous when Megan became close with Ben, and that I'd started interfering in their relationship. He spoke slowly and clearly, laying out a timeline that skipped every fact and relied entirely on character painting. According to him, I had harassed Megan for months, calls, texts, unannounced visits. He said the altercation in my apartment was a culmination of built-up hostility. Megan dabbed at her dry eyes, keeping her gaze low. Then Ben took the stand. He sat forward, hands clasped, voice low. He said I'd always meant well, but that I could be intense, that I hadn't taken the engagement well. He said I made critical comments, disapproved of their house, questioned their choices. Then he looked down and said, "It got out of hand. I didn't want it to, but it did." He never used the word assault. The courtroom was quiet when Nora stood up. She carried a small stack of documents in a binder and moved with steady steps. "Your Honor," she said, "we will not be addressing the opinions shared today. We will be presenting verified evidence in order without commentary." She started with the medical report. It outlined the injuries I had sustained: split lip, bruised ribs, contusions consistent with blunt force trauma. The physician's signature was clear, along with the date and time of the visit. Next came the photographs. Nora displayed them one at a time on the courtroom monitor. The images filled the screen. My face swollen, the bruises across my side. The room stayed silent. Nora turned back to the judge. These were taken less than 24 hours after the incident. She passed out printed copies to the court clerk and opposing counsel. Then she presented the audio clip from the voicemail Megan had left after the mortgage was denied. It played through the speakers in its entirety. Megan's voice raised and panicked, accusing me of ruining everything, demanding I undo what I'd done. The final piece was the security footage. The hallway outside my apartment had captured everything clearly. Megan arriving, yelling, then lunging at me and pushing me backward through the doorway. Ben appeared seconds later, standing still, then turning away. The judge leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench as she watched. The video ended. Nora sat back down. No one spoke for a long moment. Then the judge picked up the printed medical report and flipped through it again. Her tone was quiet, but firm. "I've reviewed the evidence presented today. This court finds no basis for a restraining order against Ms. Weston. The petition is denied in full." She paused and looked toward Megan. "I would also caution the petitioner. False testimony and abuse of the court system are taken seriously, as is physical assault." She tapped her gavel once. "This hearing is concluded." Jessica squeezed my hand. I stood slowly gathering my papers. I didn't look at Ben or Megan. I didn't need to. As we stepped into the hallway, my mother caught up with me. "Caroline," she said, "I didn't know. I didn't think it really happened like that." I didn't answer. I didn't stop walking. She stayed behind, calling after me, but I kept going. Near the elevator, Ben stepped in front of me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know what to do." I looked at him. His tie was crooked. He looked thinner. There was nothing left to say. "You stood there," I said, and watched. He nodded, once eyes low. I stepped around him and Jessica and I left the courthouse together. That evening, I opened the kiln at the pottery studio. My bowl was finished glazed, fired warm from the final round of heat. I held it carefully in both hands. The rim was still uneven, but the surface had set beautifully smooth solid, ready to hold whatever I chose to fill it with. The following week, I returned to work full-time. My desk was exactly how I'd left it, neatly stacked, reports, a calendar pinned with colored tabs, a ceramic mug I'd made in class now holding pens. Mallory had left a note tucked under my keyboard that said, "Welcome back. We missed your good sense." I smiled, tucked it in the corner of my monitor, and got back to it. The days came back in rhythm, mornings with coffee and quiet emails, afternoons filled with meetings, spreadsheets, project updates. It was steady work, measured and focused, and it felt good to move through a day without bracing for the next emotional ambush. At night, I kept busy. I signed up for a weekend cooking class, read through the books I'd stacked on my nightstand and never finished. I picked out a new shower curtain. Hung it up one Saturday morning while the smell of banana bread drifted from the oven. The bowl I'd glazed sat in the center of my dining table. I filled it with oranges and limes, then swapped them for pine cones when the season shifted. It became a quiet marker of change, small, sturdy, and mine. Megan and Ben didn't reach out again, at least not right away. My mother called once, left a voicemail I didn't return. I listened to it once she spoke softly, said she hoped I was doing well, and that families go through hard seasons. I deleted the message. Jessica and I met for coffee on Sundays. Sometimes we talked about court, but mostly we didn't. We talked about her niece applying to college, about the little consignment store down the block that had started selling handmade quilts. One afternoon, we walked through the aisles of the store and picked out a woven blanket in soft blue and cream. She said it reminded her of summer evenings on porches. I folded it over the back of my couch that evening. One day, while sorting through old mail, I came across an unopened envelope from the HR department at work. Inside was a letter about a leadership position that had opened up. I'd been nominated for consideration. My name was one of 3. I reread the letter, then reached for a pen and wrote a quiet yes on the response form. A month later, they announced my promotion. I became a division manager, steady pay bump, more responsibility, my own small team. My office had a door with a window and a view of a narrow strip of trees between buildings. I brought in a potted plant and set a framed photo of a beach trip with friends on the shelf. It wasn't grand, but it felt earned. The following Friday, I hosted dinner at my apartment. Just 6 of us, Jessica Mallory, a couple of neighbors, and 2 friends from pottery class. We sat around the dining table with plates of roasted vegetables and chicken warm bread wrapped in a cloth napkin. There was laughter, the kind that lingers between sips of wine and soft music. The room was full, not loud, just full. I looked around and saw people leaning and passing dishes, asking questions that didn't feel like tests. I didn't check my phone. I didn't glance at the door. After everyone left, I stood in the kitchen with my sleeves rolled up, rinsing dishes in the sink. The window above the faucet was fogged with steam. I turned off the water, dried my hands, and stood there for a moment. It was the first time in years I'd ended a family-style dinner feeling like I belonged at the table. The next morning, I checked the mail and found a letter in a handwriting I recognized right away. My stomach didn't tighten like it used to. I held the envelope in my hand and sat down at the table. It was from Ben. I opened it slowly. The letter was handwritten, a little uneven, as if he'd started over a few times. He wrote that he and Megan had separated, that things had come apart not long after the hearing. He said he was in counseling now, that he was trying to understand things differently. He wrote that he missed having a sister. He said he didn't expect a reply, just wanted me to know. I folded the letter and set it down. The edges were soft from handling. I sat with it for a while. Then I reached for the recycling bin and dropped it in without a sound. That evening, I watered the plants on my windowsill. The light was soft, late afternoon sliding into early evening. One of the succulents had started to stretch upward, a tiny bloom beginning at the tip. I moved it slightly so it could catch more sun. Spring arrived quietly. The tree outside my apartment bloomed early this year, small white blossoms that clung to the branches like folded paper. I noticed them one morning while watering the cactus I'd placed on the windowsill months ago. It had been just a stubborn green shape back then, rough and still. Now, tucked at the top, a single pink flower had appeared. I stood there for a moment, watching the light shift across the floor, and realized I hadn't thought about the court case in weeks. The days had stretched into something peaceful. I walked to the market on Saturdays, signed up for a weekend ceramics fair, started jogging again before work. My team at the office was thriving, and I no longer second-guessed every decision before speaking. I had found a rhythm in the quiet, something steady, something mine. Ben never wrote again. There were no calls, no letters from Megan. My mother sent a birthday card in February. I opened it, read the neat handwriting inside, then slid it into a drawer without responding. I didn't feel angry, Just done. Jessica came by one Sunday with a pan of baked pasta and a stack of magazines. We sat on the couch under the new blue and cream quilt, flipping through recipes and laughing at the idea of starting a garden on my tiny balcony. When she left, I packed up leftovers and sent her home with half. That night, I lit a candle, set a record spinning, and curled up in the corner of the couch with my book. There were still scars, faint ones on my ribs and on the inside corners of memory, but they didn't throb anymore. They didn't stop me from opening the windows or answering the phone or making plans. They were just part of the story now. I used to think strength meant never needing help. That survival was about silence or sacrifice. But standing in that courtroom document in hand, evidence laid out taught me something else. That sometimes strength is simply refusing to be erased, choosing to protect your peace even when no one else will, and letting go of the people who only ever showed up when they needed something from you. The life I have now isn't flashy, it's not loud, but it's full of small, steady joys, a dinner table that feels safe, friends who ask how I'm doing and wait for the real answer, a job that respects what I bring to the table, a home that holds only what I choose to let in. If you had told me a year ago that everything would fall apart so completely and that I would feel whole on the other side of it, I'm not sure I would have believed you. But I do now. And if you've ever been told to be quiet, to get over it, to keep the peace, no matter the cost, I hope you know you're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to start over, and you're allowed to build something better. Thank you for listening to my story. If it spoke to something in you, I'd be honored if you shared your thoughts in the comments or passed it along to someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, I hope you'll stay connected. There's power in the quiet truths we carry.